All right, back again, and with some changes that I'm actually excited about rather than tentative, or at least tentatively excited. How about that? So there's a card that I was panning through M2020, and I called it a sleeper card. I texted Brian about it. I was so excited. I said, this card I think has severe potential in Breya in particular. And that card is this one, Brought Back. So, first of all, before I bring up what the card does, you should notice something that's a problem, and that is it's a double white casting cost. So, anything double white is a card that we either really don't want to play or need a strongly compelling reason to play because double white's a big ask in a deck that's trying to get triple blue, triple black, a red, and a white into play, and now we're saying double white. So 4, 3, 2, 1. I guess there's some kind of pattern there, but try to make your dual lands work here without using a city of brass, and see if you can figure out how that works, right? So, blue red, blue black, blue white, white black, and you're still a black short. Blue red, blue black, blue red, blue white, and Urborg is the only way to actually do it. You can do it. Uh, you can do it, but it's extremely difficult. It has to be exactly, as far as I can tell, this specific mix of cards to hit all your colors for all the cards that this deck wants by turn 4. Here you've now got triple blue, double white, single red, and triple black. But so brought back is a big ask on the mana. White should be easier because you have Tithe, which fetches planes, which black doesn't have. But it turns out black is easier because of Expedition Map and Urborg giving you 2 ways to just get all the black mana you want with a single card. Anyway, having said that, is Brought Back worth it? Well, here's what it does. It's an M20 card, replacing Tail's End at this point, replacing the Felwar Stone placeholder I had and the extra mana rock. And it does this. It is an instant, which is very important, and you pick up to 2 target permanents in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn and return them to the battlefield tapped. So why is that crazy? Or why do I feel like it's crazy? Why do I think this card may end up being a staple busted card? Well, there's a few things that it does. First of all, does it have early game potential? Does it have late game potential? So those are the 2 things I want to know. Late game, it's pretty good, right? So late game, if you top deck this, it doesn't, generally speaking, doesn't do anything. You need other cards for it to do something. But the same is true of Counterspell. If you top deck a Counterspell and you're dead on board, you're still dead on board. If you top deck a Brought Back and you're dead on board, you're probably still dead on board, although it depends on what you have in play, as you'll see in one of the games that I'm going to use to illustrate how Brought Back can actually be sometimes more impactful. But having said that, clearly Counterspell is the better card. But Brought Back can function as a white-white counterspell when the card you're attempting to counter is removal. So if your opponent, for example, plays a card that's previously we had no solution to other than Yogwill. So let's say, for example, your opponent Crows and Grips your Gilded Lotus, you can tap it for mana because mana sources can be played even faster than Split Second. But you can't do anything with the mana because you can't play instants regardless due to the Split Second. So if you were holding a counterspell and you had a Gilded Lotus and your opponent Crows and Grips it, you can tap it for 3 blue. It then dies. Now you can attempt to play Counterspell, but there's no Crows and Grips, so you just hold the Counterspell, look at your 3 blue, and cry. With Brought Back, you tap this for 3 white, Grip resolves, you play Brought Back, your opponent looks at your Gilded Lotus and cries, right? So, not bad. Not bad. So it can act as a counterspell for removal. More than that, though, if in that same scenario, you floated 3 white, your opponent gripped the Gilded Lotus, it died, and you sack a fetch land, you can Brought Back the Lotus and a fetch land, and you actually end up +1 card as if you had tithed. Not too shabby for a card that just countered a Crows and Grip, effectively countered a Crows and Grip. And this could be very important on cards like, imagine, now of course the Lotus comes into play tapped, so it is something to keep in mind, but still pretty cool. Now imagine if your opponent Crows and Grip target or Treachery, and then you float 2 white, and you just let the Treachery resolve. You let the Crows and Grip resolve, right? They get their creature back who is holding off their army. They send in their army. Then you brought back the Treachery. It jumps into play, grabs their creature, untaps 5 of your lands, puts a blocker into play. You block their creature, the other creatures who are attacking. You block something, kill it, and you've got 5 mana untapped. Gross, right? So interesting. There's a lot of scenarios you can create, but cards where you can create scenarios like that are a dime a dozen. Tail's End, I could paint the picture of how you get that turn 2 countering a fetch land or whatever, and it's super awesome. You counter a strip mine, and I've done it. But if it only works out in Magical Christmas Land where you can describe how a card's going to work under these conditions, and you can't figure out how it's useful when you're not under those conditions, then the card probably doesn't belong in this deck. There are decks where your overall card quality is very consistent and having some flexibility. It doesn't cost you much. So like in mono blue, running a Tail's End probably does make sense just because you have, a hand of counter spells. So you can use the correct one for the correct situation, and eventually Tail's End will be the correct one for the situation. Whereas in this deck, every card is unique. In general, every card is unique and has a unique purpose. And so you can't afford cards that aren't uniquely useful at the time you draw them. So is Tail's End, or is Brought Back rather, useful at the time you draw it, whereas Tail's End was not, right? If I draw Tail's End, I look at the board and I go, what am I going to do with this? I just have to sit and hope that my opponent walks into my trap. Brought Back is not like that, because although it's a kind of trap card, right, it deals with removal, it does a few other tricks. For example, let's say your opponent kills your Breya and then attacks with 2 1 toughness guys, right? Or 1 2 toughness guy, for example. If you allow Breya to go to the graveyard and then you brought back the Breya mid-combat, this puts the permanents into play tapped. But Breya comes into play tapped and then pops out with 2 untapped 1/1 flyers, who you can then use to block their 2/2 who's attacking, or their 2 1/1s, or whatever the case is. So pretty cool there. All right, so that's it for that mode. I think you can get that, but there's a few other things you can do with Brought Back that make it really crazy. And the first one is this. Let's say these are your first 2 turns. Okay, so I'm going to sort the deck, and then I'm going to pull this out in just a second. So let's say you load up a new game, and you go first turn, and you go Misty Rainforest. Second turn, you go Marsh Flats. And then your opponent makes their second turn, and they do whatever they do. And at the end of their turn, you sack, and you go get, say, I don't know. Let's say we go get a Scrubland, and we go get a Tundra, right? Where's my stinking Tundra? T is for Tundra. And then you tap both of these for white, and you play Brought Back, and then you target these, and that's the end of turn 2. That's at the end of your opponent's turn, and now it's your turn, and you lay a land, for example, whatever, doesn't matter, and you have 5 mana on turn 3. This was like a Soul Ring where 2 of the lands produce colored mana as opposed to colorless mana. That's a pretty crazy turn. I am not sure that you are going to lose many, if any, games in which you ramp that significantly that quickly. But there's a couple other things you can do with Brought Back. So one of them is, let's replace those cards with these cards and talk about gross. I mean, even if we'll grab the same lands here. End of my opponent's turn, strip your land, wasteland you. Brought Back, strip mine, wasteland. Untap, draw, play a land for the turn, whatever. Strip mine, wasteland you again. My opponent just went down 4 mana sources and I went +1. Go. I think you probably just win the game on the spot. And lastly, you can you can do stuff like activate a planeswalker and use their last counter. Let's say I ready and I take it from 3 to 0 so that I can kill something. Hopefully I can throw a fetch land in there, but even if I don't, just bringing back a fresh ready and immediately using it is amazing. But hey, if we can throw in a fetch land and turn it into a +1 card advantage, great. But usually sneaking a planeswalker back out will be positive card advantage. Or for example, a Tezzeret the Seeker, where you've used Tezzeret on 3 or whatever, and you use Tezzeret on 0, or rather, whatever it needs to be. I don't know. Maybe you use Tezzeret on 1 to get a Soul Ring, or I don't know, whatever the scenario is. A lot of times it's usually something along the lines of this. You go get a Winter Orb, your opponent's going to attack Tezzeret, so you just go get a Talisman of Progress, and then you brought back your Tezzeret fresh at 5 copies, and you go at 5 counters, and then you can untap said Talisman of Progress or do whatever it is that you need to do at that point. It's sort of trivial. So anyway, some cool stuff with that. A lot of talking about brought back. It changed one other card. I had the blue-red talisman in here. It's not that important. As you can see, there's only 2 red cards plus Breya. It's a good card, but it's not like severely important. So I pulled it out and I actually just put in Seal of Cleansing. I wanted an extra disenchant if I can help it. I always do. I like Seal because you can target it with Enlightened Tutor. So it gives you a way to either, depending on which tutor you have, you can go ahead and deal with certain really problematic permanents. If that's the way that if you need to burn a tutor to kill it, you can. But Seal of Cleansing specifically now has a best friend in Brought Back where you can potentially sack the seal, kill something on your opponent's board, hopefully sack a fetch land or whatever, brought back the fetch land and the seal, and kill, or living the dream, right? Seal of Cleansing Wasteland. So end of turn, kill your artifact mana, kill your land, brought back, kill your other artifact mana, kill your other land. Again, that's probably just going to win the game on the spot, right? So anyway, that's it. Now let's take a look at the 2 games because you probably want to see this in action and decide for yourself if it's good. And of course, I don't know. Well, we'll see down the road if it is sustainable in this deck. But for now, I've got 2 really cool games for you. Now remember, all the cool, tricky, like bring back my strip mines and Seal of Cleansing and dual lands and stuff, or fetch lands, all that's really cool. But if the card doesn't have late game utility, like if you have a board and you don't have any fetches and strips and seals and whatnots, and you draw brought back and you go, wow, this card sucks, I can't do anything with it, then the card probably doesn't belong in the deck. But in this case, you won't, because unless you have nothing but lands, if you draw a brought back, you're going to look at your board and go, oh, okay, well, I don't have a play with this right now. Like, I don't have any tricky, cool plays. But as soon as my opponent plays removal, I've got a solution in hand, if they make a play. Brought back also, incidentally, can act like a sinkhole in the sense of you can do land, your opponent goes strip mine or wasteland on your lands, and you just bring it right back into play. Particularly if one's, so let's say you go, fetch land, and your opponent goes like strip mine, Mox, right? And then you go untapped, dual land, Tundra or whatever, right? And then they go, okay, they want a Vampiric Tutor, so they go strip mine your land. You're like, okay. They go, and you don't even have to do it right away, right? You just wait. They go to your end step, they cast Vampiric Tutor, you let that resolve. After that resolves, you crack your fetch. Oh, I guess you'd have to float a white. I guess you couldn't wait that long. But anyway, you'd tap it for white, you let that resolve, you crack your fetch, you go get a second white, you play brought back, you get back, you now have 1 land in play, and you put 2 into play from the graveyard. Your opponent went from a situation where you had 2 lands and they had 2 lands, or they had a Mox and land, to now they've got just the Mox, and you've got 3 lands. probably swinging a game pretty hard, right? Acting as a rampant growth that also sinkholed your opponent simultaneously in that example. So, yeah, just double rampant growth at instant speed is gross, very gross. Anyway, so a couple of games to illustrate. Johnny Rue here is playing Crom and Ikra, which I don't know what it does, but anyway, it doesn't matter what it does. In this particular case, opponent leads off with the Temple of Mastery. I've got an interesting hand here, so I run out a Weathered Wayfarer, always a good threat. Opponent doesn't have a turn 2 play, so I play a fetch land. I can still use Wayfarer because I can sack and fetch in response. Opponent regrows their land, so they're hurting for land a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and just Wayfarer. I don't need to use the sack right away. I go ahead and get a Strip Mine and then use it to play a Talisman that I drew. I also have a brought back that I've drawn, so I'm setting up for a brought back turn. And my opponent tries for a Sylvan Library, so I have to crack my fetch and mana leak it. But okay, I'm going to pause. I screwed up right here. I was trying to click Wasteland, and I clicked freaking Windswept Heath. It's the next card, okay? So what should have happened here, so imagine in your mind now, I strip mine my opponent's untapped land. With strip mine on the stack, I use Weathered Wayfarer. I go get Wasteland, not this stupid thing. Okay. Strip mine resolves, taking out my opponent's land. I play Wasteland. I sack Wasteland and kill my opponent's Underground Sea, leaving him with just these 2 lands. Okay. Then I tap white, play Brought Back, return strip mine, Wasteland, and pass for the turn. My opponent is down to 2 lands. I've got a strip mine and a Wasteland, plus 3 other mana, plus the Weathered Wayfarer in play. Game over. And as it turns out, even though I only got the I'm going to pause again. Even though I only got this stupid Windswept Heath, as you can see, I brought back a Strip Mine and a Windswept Heath, and then I had 1 mana floating because I didn't get double Strip Mine. I used 1 on producing mana for me as opposed to denying them. And so I just Imperial Seal and I go get I have Tezzeret, so I'm going to go get Force of Will, and then I'm going to throw it on Tezzeret. I'm going to strip mine my opponent, throw it on Tezzeret, go get a Crucible with it, holding Force of Will next turn. Play the Crucible off Tezzeret and replay the strip mine again. Opponent is strip locked out of the game, and it's all because I brought Sexy back there. Anyway, pretty cool turn, and that was like living the double rampant growth sinkhole dream, right? Or it would have been if I hadn't screwed up and misclicked, but it turned out all right. And then I've got this game where I used the other trick I talked about. Now, in neither case would I need to use this for. So notice I could have held the card for countering removal, but in both cases. In this case as well, I don't need to do that. I actually need to use it proactively, and the card is both proactive and reactive, which makes it so good. So I have to mulligan twice, and I'm facing Karn, though, and my opponent mulligans twice. I figure game's over before it started, especially when I see this junk. Like, Key is just a bad card, but my opponent does get a Grim to go with it, and then ramps into 5 mana Sisay's Ring, Sculpting Seal Sisay's Ring. So wait a minute. This game that was supposed to be a buy, my opponent's now got a Dust Bowl with 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 mana in play. Of course, if they put some into Dust Bowl, it's going to be less. But also remember their commander's Karn. So if I go, say, Vampiric for a Mana Crypt here, my opponent can play Karn and activate it, targeting the crypt and killing it. So I can't even play 0 mana rocks here. And I had it in my head that I was going to do. I mean, I thought I was just going to mind twist my opponent out of the game right now. So game plan changes. We move to a Dak Fade and play, and I have to hope my opponent doesn't kill my mana right here. Or if they do, I have to hope that they stop, and they don't. So I get to play Dak Fade and steal their commander. So I take the threat off the board, and now I'm going to start going after mana. My opponent then kills mana, but it's a little late. I have Dak Fade, and I throw a Mind Twist and a Remand, Spellseeker for Brought Back, and I attack for 4, and pass. On my opponent's turn, they're able to generate a ton of mana, play Predator Flagship, make Karn fly, and then kill it with Predator Flagship. On my turn, I get to go to town with Brought Back. I don't have a fetch land, but I do get to, did you pick that up? I didn't have a fetch land, so I actually did not get the full value with brought back, but I still got extreme value with it. I sacked Dak Faden in order to -2 and steal a Sisse's ring, and then I brought back Dak. This is getting complicated. And then steal the other Sisse's ring with my tapped Dak Faden. Now, wish I had saved a fetch land here, but greed being what it is. I should have had +1 land here, but I'll take it. And now my opponent's pretty well toast, right? They can get Coldotha Forge Master, apparently, their top deck into play, but I've got Muddle the Mixture. I should have plus Dak here before doing all this, but I don't know. I was pretty excited by the recovery. I go ahead and just Jason bounce our guy, Dak away 2 cards, just because I know that getting counters on Dak Faden is the most important thing I can do right now. My opponent realizes this is totally hopeless. They can't get a creature into play long enough to do anything due to Jace. Dak Faden's going to steal all their mana, and or their Predator flagship if I choose, but I would target the mana. And that's it. All over. Opponent can Dust Bowl me, but who cares? It's done. So, awesome game. Brought back Dak is savage. Hopefully you enjoyed that, as well as the brought back double strip mine turn, even though it didn't play out correctly due to the error. I had a bunch of other games here, but brought back never really came up, and the best game of them all was the most insane recovery ever. Brian was actually online, and he actually got to see it, and I picked up, like my opponent played, he was playing combo and drew 7 multiple times and generated tons and tons and tons of mana, and I just barely managed to eke my way out of it. And the only reason I did was because my opponent was using Time Twister effects, Windfall and stuff like that. And on key turns, at one point I had Force of Will, and then I had Force of Negation that they wheeled me into for their follow-up that was going to be a backbreaker. I had Seal of Cleansing right on time to deal with a dumb infinite mana combo that draws all of your deck. I mean, it's cool, but kind of dumb. Fortunately, I had Seal of Cleansing right on time. I was able to Force of Negation. My opponent imprinted a card that untaps all of your non-land permanents onto an Isochron Scepter, and they had a Sensei's Divining Top. And I let him imprint it, and then when they activated the Scepter, I Force a Negation the card, and then on the next turn was able to play Seal of Cleansing, kill the Scepter. So I went 2 for 1 on myself, 2 for 1 on them by killing the Scepter and the card. And then later, my opponent time twisted, and because they time twisted, I actually ended up with the 3rd Force of Will. At the end of the game, I had forced 3 times in order to save myself and ultimately take control of the game with... I didn't have full control, but I was able to race them with Breya, and I had a solid amount of stall with my opponent had I don't know, 5 or 6 artifact mana and probably twice as much mana in land, but I was able to orb to slow them down to about approximately 1 spell every other turn, and that was just enough to allow me to smash them with Breya. But it was an insane comeback. And the game bugged out because Time Twister games always seem to bug out. So it was unfortunate, but overall, I think hopefully we'll get another matchup or something high quality like that. And if I do and it doesn't bug, we'll get to see more of that. I'm also looking forward to more brought back games. What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments, but I really think this card is a sleeper. It's one of those cards that doesn't click. Like, you look at it and you go, it's just some Johnny gimmick crap, right? But I don't think so. I think this card is extremely, extremely strong in a format with fetches, in a format with sack to draws, in a format with wastelands, in a format with sack to kills. You can even do weird, I expect, I haven't thought it through, but I bet you could generate mana with Breya and brought back somehow. No, I guess you can't. But of course, as we saw in that game, in a format with Planeswalkers as well, and in a format where your opponent wants to kill your stuff. So, tell me what you think. Is it worth it? I have a suspicion, knowing my viewers, who's going to say yay and who will say nay. What's always interesting to me is when I'm wrong about that, usually that means I'm on the right track. So what do you think? How do you like the card? We'll need to see it in action some more, I suspect. But the main sticking point for it is going to be that double white, and we will see how that goes. But that's all I've got for now. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this new edition from M2020 and the replacement of the other cards there. I took out 2 mana sources and put in brought back, which can generate 2 mana sources, interestingly enough. All right, that's all I've got. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.